'Cause you can't, you won't, and you don't stop. Or when you can't, you won't, and you don't stop. Might be coming down for sure.
So in this final video, we're moving from looking at the individual requirements of directors and their liability to what does the board do? What does this group do? What kinds of decisions do they actually make? Now, obviously, we could spend an entire semester talking about this. And what have we got? 5 minutes? So it's going to be a brief introduction. I will focus a little on what the law has said about this and then provide a bit of context about how it works in practice. So let's dive into this, the role of the board. So the first thing to recognise is that a director doesn't have any power, right? They only have power unless they get a delegation from the board. They only have power when they come together as a group. So it's the board that makes decisions. And legally, the law looks at how the individual director acts as part of that decision-making process, right? Were they self-interested? Did they apply care and diligence? But then what does the group do? Okay, they're given this power, so what do we expect this group, this board of directors to actually do? Well, most times we don't expect them to manage. There's a difference between governing and managing, and that the board's role is to govern. Managers are to manage. So one of the key things that the boards do is that they set expectations for managers, what they expect them to do. But managers also have expectations of boards, right? They don't expect boards to become too meddlesome, etc., right? That they're not going to be too hands-on because that's managing. Now, there's no clear articulation of the difference between managing and directing. And to some degree, it's probably going to vary by the kind of company. In a bigger company, they're going to be much broader decisions than in a smaller company. What the board is trying to do is to ensure that there's an appropriate return coming back for the risk being taken, balancing risk versus return. So they're going to monitor management to make sure that everything's being done that they ask for and that there's not too many agency costs. They're going to be accountable back to stakeholders through the law and through things like, for instance, these days, social media. They're accountable for the decisions. They also develop and implement strategy. They also develop and implement policy, right, which is how they expect people within the corporation to act. And in fact, these 4 dimensions are part of, we don't go into detail, but Tricker's model of what a board does. Okay, so we're balancing conformance with the law and requirements with the necessity to perform whatever it is that the company should be performing, making money if it's a for-profit, the social purpose if it's a not-for-profit. Legally, the role of the board has been considered, and probably the best statement comes from Rogers in the AWA case. What's the role of the board? The role of the board is to set the goals of the corporation, appoint the CEO, monitor, oversee the plans of management, review company's progress towards these goals. Sorry, that's monitor. This is probably oversee strategy. Okay, so they're involved in strategy. Set the goals, appoint the CEO, oversee strategy, monitor what's going on. So what you can start seeing is that there is a fundamental role around the strategic direction of the company. Boards need to understand at a very least and be involved in the strategic direction of the company. And so I go back to Module 11 where we talked about the tensions. Boards need to be entrepreneurial while having prudent risk control. They need to understand what's going on in the company but stand back from day-to-day operations. They've got to understand the pressures in the short term but focus on the long term. Focus on the commercial need, focus on making money while being responsible. And these are tensions that it's very difficult to actually draw a bright line box around and say you should do X, Right? It requires discernment and judgment. If we take together all of the activities that a board should do, a list would look something like this. A board needs to determine strategy, look after the CEO's selection and succession, monitor performance, overview risk management, particularly looking at compliance and internal controls, network and be sometimes the face of the organisation and step in if there's a crisis. In these ways, the board maintains ultimate control and responsibility for the company. So there you have it. Very hard to come up with a specific, clear set of recommendations about what a board should do. But it's that overall direction and control. And within those boundaries, management have then delegated the power to execute and do. Of course, the board is going to listen to management. And management is going to listen to the board. So it's this symbiotic relationship between the two. But I think the thing to remember is always that the board is ultimately responsible, ultimately accountable, and ultimately in charge of the decision-making in the company.